Then we go a little further, and we notice some other things that are very interesting here. She had suffered quietly. We get the sense that she had suffered in her situation quietly. Probably the family did not really mention it, didn't talk about it, wouldn't bring it up. The neighbors knew about it, but they're not going to bring it up because, it's just, you know how it is. And plus, it's probably over time, they just didn't mention it. They all talked around it or worked around it or pretended it wasn't there and went about their business. And so she suffered quietly, taking the money that she had to various doctors. Now, it took her 12 years to use her money. That did imply that she probably came from a wealthy background. But even there, she had to deal with things quietly by herself. In fact, in her desperation was not a public one. She entered the crowd. Now, normally, if people had recognized who she was, the crowd would have split away from her. She didn't even look at them. No, she just kind of entered into the crowd and went up. And she thought to herself, she had watched and heard about Jesus, and she came to this point that, if I just touch the hem of his garment, if I just reach out and grab just a little hem of his garment, I will be healed. The Lord, talk about the faith there that, all I need to do is just touch that hem of his garment, just brush up against it. Maybe just get into the crowd and reach out and brush that garment, an edge of his garment, and I will be healed. On the other hand, we see Jairus, or the ruler of the synagogue. He has servants, and there's promotion. He goes to Jesus. We don't know what he was doing, but as he's on the way back, people come to him and let him know, hey, your daughter's dead. There's people already at the house mourning and weeping by the time they get there to the house. So it's already the neighbors and everybody are coming in to express their condolences. And the implication here with this wailing and mourning, in this culture, one of the things that you would do during a funeral, it's the opposite of our culture. You actually hired, back in that culture, and there's still some cultures that do this, you hire professional mourners who come in and cry over the death of your loved one. Because it was always viewed in the ancient world, if nobody cried over your death, you must be an evil person. In fact, the way we conduct our funerals, they would look at it and go, man, that guy must have really been evil because they're having to talk him up. I mean, just the mindset, okay? It's a totally different thing going on. There in that world, they expected you to cry. They expect you to have tears. They expected to hear wailing. That was all part of the process of working through the grief. The whole funeral process was not so much about remembering the dead, but it was about mourning the loss of your loved one. And so these folks, the text implies that already these people had been hired and brought in. Talk about moving fast. My wife says here in the South, we bury quickly. Because up north, usually about a week or so before you bury. Down here, we bury much more quickly. And I explained to her part of the reason for that is before air conditioning, you didn't want a body sticking around too long. But anyways, we do bury much more quickly down here than up north. But so anyways, all this, and you have all that commotion, you people, how it is, somebody's a dignitary and everybody and their brother shows up. As we go through this, it's interesting that Jesus, when he heals when the lady's healed, and this is something I found very interesting, he turned around and forced her to give a public testimony. She had been suffering all her life in private, at home, quietly, and upon her healing, and she just wanted an anonymous healing. But Jesus turned and forced her to give a public testimony about what had just happened in her life. In this crowd, he brought her out and pointed her out and said, look, what has happened? Now, maybe he did this for several reasons, because there may have been a lot of people who didn't know her in there. They just didn't realize she was in the crowd, okay? and would, under normal circumstances, when they would have seen her, would have gone, oh, step aside. And so by having her give a public testimony that was out there for everybody, that then she could go home and say, now I am clean. Now I can go to church. Could you imagine that? Couldn't go to church for 12 years. Now she can go to church publicly and go and sit with the other ladies without any shame or without people saying, you can't come in here. She could go in fellowship. She could go to the WMS meeting. She could go to the ladies' meeting. She could be part of the garden club again. She could be part of the community again. And so Jesus, in her case, forced her to give a public testimony so that her shame could be removed publicly from her, and she could stand now and enjoy her family, her community, her friends, and all that were around her. Jairus, he does something a little different. The ruler of the synagogue, he does something different. They come down and they come and they stop. While he's talking about the lady, Jairus' people come and talk to him and say, no, Jesus, the girl's dead. Don't bother with Jesus anymore. In their tone, we see that they did not fully comprehend who Jesus was. Evidently, somehow, this woman understood who Jesus was, and you even see Jesus referring to her as a daughter of God, as one who is saved. But when you look at what he tells Jairus, they come and they tell him, they tell Jairus, don't bother the teacher anymore, send him home, your daughter's dead, there's no more hope. Jesus turns to the ruler of the synagogue, to the leader of the church, and tells them, believe. You'd expect it to have been the opposite way. He needed to believe. He needed to trust that Jesus could still meet his need. And so Jesus turns to him and says, believe. There in verse 36. And so then, now, at this point, Jesus turns to the crowd and he sends them away. Don't follow us anymore. Go on. There's nothing more here for you to see. Go. He even sends away most of his disciples, except for 3. And you see them there, except for Peter, James, and John. And so now it's just those 3, Jesus, the leader of the synagogue, and whoever had come to let him know about the death of his daughter. And they go to the house, and they get to the house. And there's all this commotion going on, as I referred to earlier. The people mourning, and, they'd probably be tearing their clothes, throwing ashes in the air, all sorts of different things happening, going on, mourning the death of this little girl. And she was only, by the way, 12 years of age. The woman had suffered, was an older woman, and she had suffered for 12 years. This little girl had only had 12 years of living on this earth, walking on this earth. She was just 12. It's a very interesting thing that beginning 12, the end 12. The connections here. And Jesus stands in the crowd and looks around and says, why are you mourning? Why all this commotion? She's not dead, she just sleeps. And they all laughed at him. The doctor had already been there. The coroner had already been there and officially pronounced her dead. One of the saddest sights is when you're in a room with a person whose loved one has just passed away. And they're just mourning the death. And you can look at the body, and the body changes color. It changes color. And you can see that the person's dead by just the change of color in the body. And you hear them mourning. And so you kind of sense that's what's going on here. But Jesus says she's not dead yet. She's asleep. Now, I don't know what's going on in this thing. It's kind of is Jesus metaphorically talking about death, asleep, in the sense that she's going to be woken up in just a little bit? Is she really dead, or just in a comatose state that they didn't recognize at the time? They were overreacting and they're acting too quickly. I don't know. what's going on here? But he makes that declaration, and basically they all laugh at him. They all turn, the mourners stop, the people throwing the ashes, the people tearing their clothes, the people wailing, all stop and turn and looking, really? And they laugh at him. So he sends everybody out of the household, and it would have been a large household, except for the leader of the synagogue, his wife, and then Jesus' disciples, the 3 disciples. And they go to the room where the little girl's lying, and Jesus comes up and he sits down beside her. Now you have to understand, in the ancient world, a dead body was considered unclean. So only those who were there for the purpose of preparing the body for burial would be touching the body. And so he reaches out and takes her hand, which under normal circumstances you'd have thought would have caused him to be defiled, but he's not defiled. Just like with the woman who his holiness causes her to be clean, he turns and lifts up her hand, and he just calls out to her, "Little girl, arise, get up." Just like he was talking to, somebody who's asleep. When you go into your kid's room when they had to go to school and you had to wake them up. Get up, time to get up. And she gets up and begins walking around. She just kind of wakes up and it kind of like just, she just starts walking around doing it. Like, oh, she's feeling well. And that was always the sign in the ancient world that you were getting better, was that you were able to get up and walk around. And then he turns to the leader of the synagogue and his wife, and he says to them, "No one should know this. As far as they know, she was just asleep. There was no big miracle here. Nothing big, nothing fancy at all. In fact, she needs some food. Get her something to eat." And as I thought about this, he responded to the leader of the synagogue differently. I don't know exactly the medical things going on, but the point was he probably gave to that synagogue leader something that he rarely had as a leader, which was time alone with his family to celebrate the healing, the strength of his daughter. So, they had 2 different needs. One needed a public affirmation so that she could go out publicly. The other needed some peace and quiet. Some time alone with their family. Some time alone enjoying, praising, and thanking God for how he had intervened in their lives. It is very interesting how God responds to us each according to our needs. He knows what we need. He understands the burdens of our hearts. He understands the pressures of our lives. He understands the way people look at us and may say things about us, or however they may interact with us. And he asks us simply to believe. Some of us have that faith and just need to act upon it like the lady. Some of us may need reassurance, called to believe like the leader of the synagogue. But with each, he knew what their needs were and responded to them. And the same is so for us. Both these people came to Jesus out of desperation. Great desperation. And there was a lot of chaos and crowds and everything else going on, and yet Jesus took the time to tailor his involvement with each according to their need. And so, God may not deal with me as he deals with you. He may not deal with you as he deals with your brother-in-law or your parents or whatever, but he knows your needs. Seek him out. You believe, trust in him to bring you through whatever it is you are facing.